This is an extension of, or a development of my basic grow buckets, which were based on some of the ideas by Mark Thomas Payne on Eve Growing on the Facebook group. Previously I was using these 25 litre containers and making a subfloor using beer cans, drink cans, Coke cans, just to kind of make a false floor in the base, and then using corrugated cardboard rolled up to sort of fill the voids in between the cans, and having a drain valve or a fill, just a little filler pipe using a bead of 21.5mm overflow pipe, and then I had a sort of subfloor that fitted on here like that, and then you just filled it out with compost and grow in it. And they work quite well, but one thing that I noticed is after a while, obviously they're kind of static. These were tethered with the overflow pipe, so they're sort of daisy chained together, and they work quite well. But the problem is when the plants are a little bit too big for the bucket and you want to do something with them, it's quite awkward to move the bucket, tip the bucket out, because they're all plumbed together, and if you disconnect one you've got to drain the system and all that kind of thing. So I wanted to come up with something slightly easier, something more convenient really. So what I thought I'd do, because these containers are sort of reclaimed, just car wash detergent containers, they're freely available, so you can literally find hundreds of those if you just look around for them. So what I thought of doing is I've used a second bucket. So this is basically the subfloor from the previous sort of system, but what I've done something slightly different. I've got some capillary matting here. This was actually chuck out from a garden centre that's closing down. So there's a plastic subfloor, and the subfloor itself, I'm just using this off-cut acrylic from a laser cutters, and I've cut this out and drilled holes in there. I've got these little finger cutouts to make it easier to lift out. But what I'm going to do here is I've got a can, but the can is just acting as a filter, so it's just got holes stabbed in the top, and then I've cut a cross in the side of the can and folded those corners in, and then looped that over an elbow, so it sort of locates on the overflow pipe there as well. So this is just softwood offcuts, so I'm using that to help sort of support the subfloor, but then obviously that wood itself will wick up moisture, and that will start to break down and then absorb excess nitrate from there, and then eventually that will become soil itself, and then I'll be able to use that in the container. But to hold all these bits together, I'm just going to use charcoal, and again the charcoal will absorb the nitrate and kind of charge itself up, and then I'll be able to use that as a soil additive as well. But also the charcoal will act as a kind of filter in there as well, so that it will absorb any kind of excess nitrates and odours as well, so it keeps the water a little bit fresher. And another thing with these, because I'm using the reservoir is about 130mm deep, that's a lot of water for a container just maybe a foot tall, so that's probably enough moisture for about 2 or 3 months or something like that. And I want to change the water routinely, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to connect a inline 90-degree sort of T to this piece, and then connect all those together, because they'll all be set at the same level. And then I've got another kind of tank like this with a little float valve in it, and then I'll just routinely set a timer, so once a week that will fill up, and then the containers will use the moisture up, and then the container will top everything up, so that'll be automated. It's really sort of defining what the interval needs to be, but by using more timber and charcoal in here, I'm actually going to reduce the volume of water that this reservoir takes to fill it up, and in a way that's beneficial really, because there's going to be more air in there and less actual water to go kind of anaerobic, and give it a bit more space for aeration too. So the subfloor fits on like this, and on this one I've got these little flaps that continue right down to the base of the bucket. But what I'm also thinking of doing, some of these, I'm not sure how well this is going to work, but in the polytunnel, because the polytunnel is obviously undercover, during the sort of autumn, winter, when you're not growing, when you're not watering, it becomes really quite dry. So I was thinking of setting some of these in as little sort of reservoirs actually in the grow beds, and then flip these down and then surround that with wood chip and have this plumbed into the outside of the polytunnel. I was thinking about having a sort of water tank, like a kind of loft cold water tank, and then having the float valve connected to there, so it's just gradually wicking away the moisture into the surrounding soil, maybe about a foot around it. And if I've got those between every bay in the polytunnel, between each poles of like metre intervals, then I'm thinking that's going to keep the width of the bed nicely sort of irrigated and help in terms of sort of soil life and keeping things moving and keeping that organic matter breaking down and being worked into the soil all through the year, as opposed to just during the growing season when you're kind of disturbing the soil as well. So that's sort of the base part. But the container itself, because capillary action only works around about a foot maximum, if you imagine this container's a foot deep and there's your water level here, that soil is going to be not saturated, but it's going to be damp right the way up. So if you get seeds landing on here, blowing in, they're going to germinate. If you make that container maybe 350, 400 millimeters tall, the top few inches is going to be quite dry. So you'd have to use additional watering to keep that going. But if you've got large plants, and if you're planting into this from pots, say they're already in 3-4 inch deep pots, you're planting into that dry layer, but the roots are kind of will be circling around the base of the pot. They're already into that damp soil, and as this water level goes down in the reservoir, then those roots will sort of seek out that moisture as it lowers down as well. So you'll get healthier plants. You're not just watering from the top, but at the same time it sort of helps to kind of control the weeds that are growing in here as well. So if you wanted to actually use this as a sort of somewhere to sow into, you can make shorter containers, sit them on top, and then that's just like a lovely big flower pot, and then you're going to have loads of sort of self-watering as well. Obviously I'm going to drill holes in these, but this, for the demonstration, I'm just using another one of these containers. That's going to be another little sort of reservoir. So you could make these different heights, maybe 300, 350, 400. So if you had a really kind of thirsty plant like a courgette or a squash, you could grow that in here. But then if you had a deeper container, the bigger plant is going to be able to root down and root into that compost. If you imagine something like that, that would tend to get quite root bound, and you'd have to sort of plant it on into a bigger container. So I'm thinking this is going to work well. So if you can imagine, this one that was the height of the previous grow bucket, which was quite bulky as well. So if I cut down the height of that a little bit, maybe make it 350, I think that's going to be a nice size. It's going to be easier to move around. It's going to be lighter, and then you're not disturbing all the plumbing and all the irrigation, because that's already kind of set up. So with these little side flaps, some of those are going to be set into the beds actually in the polytunnel, and then these are going to kind of come out, and then they'll wick moisture around the bed as well. But what I was thinking of doing, where I've set these up in the centre of the polytunnel, I wanted to have a little area where it's a bit more experimental in terms of growing and using different containers and different sort of methodologies. So that one's going to be, these are going to be set up, but I'm going to use wood chip around it, and I might have a little bit of habitat as well, so it will encourage worms to move around here. And then by having the container set down level with the soil, then obviously worms will be able to find their way in these gaps. They're small gaps, but I'm sure they'll find a way in. And when I set these containers up, I'll probably sit that on a little bit of biochar as well, so there's voids and spaces around there. So what is quite nice about this as well, once these are all leveled up, if you find, because these are going to be sitting on basically compost and soil, I'm not going to be on concrete or anything like that. If there's soil movement and these settle down, and then you find you're kind of running out of level, one of these, the water level is going to be higher in some than others. So with these wooden blocks, that actually maintains an air gap. So if you can see the wood blocks there, they're actually higher than that can. So once it's filled up, it's not going to become saturated in terms of standing water. But if that was sort of sinks down into the ground or something like that, and you might notice that over a run of these, it's easy just to pop the container off, move that to one side, and then just have a look and sort of see what's happening in here. And also, out of interest to me, for my benefit, there's going to be all sorts of cardboard and biochar and things going on in here. So it'll be interesting to be able to lift up the container, and you'll also be able to check on the kind of roots if they're actually into this reservoir, and you'll be able to sort of see how worms are going on here. I'm going to have a soil feeding station, like a worm tower in the center, so that's itself is going to kind of come down here, mate onto that capillary tube, and so that will control the moisture from any excess sort of in the pre-compost part composted material that I feed into that worm tower. And on these taller containers as well, base of the container, because I don't want it completely full of soil, obviously, I'm going to use compost, but compost will settle down and compact over time. So what I was thinking of doing is mixing in subsoil and wood chip and lime and charcoal. So in a way there might be 100 millimeters of that in the base of this container with the worm towel. The worm towel will provide an aeration tube as well down the side of it. So it will be like a miniature kind of lasagna kind of bed. So you'll be composting in situ. So there's potential nutrition in nitrates in that layer there. And obviously that's breaking down as the plants are getting further down and growing into that, and the worm activity is working that into the soil. So I think it's a way of sort of composting in situ, even in a very, very small container as well. But this is a bit of an experiment, really. I just want to kind of, I've got a few ideas in my head, and I'm just trying to sort of work through them and see what works, what doesn't work. But I'm liking this already. And one thing as well, if I've got a worm container, and these will tend to dry out over time, I don't have a problem with excess moisture in these, because I'm using lots of wood chip and brewery waste. But another thing I thought about doing is having the worm bins as kind of soil feeding stations, so they'll have holes in the base. And then if you imagine these are close together, when the plants start to grow, you might want to have, I don't know, whatever you're growing in there, tomatoes here, basil, mint, and they might need a bit more space between them. So what I thought I could do is take one of the containers off and then swap that out for a soil feeding station as well. So then the soil feeding station is actually getting the moisture and those sort of favourable conditions for the worms from here as well. And if that's surrounded by wood chip, you've got that sort of expansion in terms of habitat, so that's going to enable the worms to work up and getting into that material itself. So I think it's quite a nice system. I like this flexibility. So say I'm growing plants in a hot house, in a kind of hotbed with a sort of cold frame. I'd say you want to kind of get them introduce those to sort of growing outdoors a little bit, get them accustomed to the temperatures. You could start planting them up in small containers like this, and then in the day when it's a nice weather, you can kind of take those out, give them the air, and then if it's going to be a late frost, or you can just nip them in and then pop them in there, and they'll be happy for a few months in there. So it's that sort of flexibility, and I think that's going to be its sort of strong point, really. And I'm going to pick up some more of these containers. They vary a little bit, so what I've tried to do is keep the bases all the same, and then depending on what ones I'll find, if they're really different and they don't fit these, I'll just turn those into the worm beds. And if I can kind of find some, maybe 5 or 6 that are the same, I'll sit those in. It just means when they're in a row, it just keeps things quite neat. But for now, I've just made 6 of these, so I have 2 by 3. And what I might do is just make a central overflow pipe, and then teeing off each, whatever that distance is there, maybe 400 millimeters. So this will be a massive big wicking bed. Thank you.